Hello everybody and welcome to Amphlett Reviews, back with another Hong Kong content review, continuing on with the sequel territory, which is Black Cat 2, released in 1992, 1 year after the first film, with returning director Stephen Chung, with our main returning character, Black Cat, Jade Leung, with a new introduction character, Robert Shaw, which is from the Mortal Kombat and Death Race movies. This film around, it is a much more of a traditional D&B, straight to DVD budget, low budget kind of sequel, kind of thrown in there for the bargain bucket bin, which is getting a 88 film edition release, also having a Vinegar Syndrome release with 1 and 2 as a double pack edition available right now. This has a HD version available to watch, which I managed to watch recently. And diving straight into this one, guys, Black Cat 2, unfortunately, is a very lackluster, unfortunately disappointing, while having some good merit, kind of follow-up movie from the first one. And if you watch my video for the first movie, I actually quite liked that. I thought the first Black Cat film, even though based on Lakita's storyline, I actually thought it was a really good Hong Kong version of that idea while doing its own thing alongside. I thought the drama action element to it with our main lead protagonist, I thought was very compelling and I thought was very engaging from start to finish. I was fully invested in that kind of character arc. The first film I've actually defended quite a lot. I thought it was actually a pretty solid, really well handled movie, and I was quite invested in the kind of the main protagonist character and her transformation as the film went along. And this film, slightly more budget, but still feels more of a kind of a TV pilot, very similar to kind of like, Project S with Michelle Yeoh in that as well, where it kind of feels like the same kind of thing, where the first film had much more of a script, it feels much more of a kind of high stakes, it had drama, and it had good action moments, and it kind of felt very different compared to what this film does as well. But the film opens up with a kind of a pseudoscience kind of, recontextualizing some of the scenes within the first movie. Basically, she's returned back to the program. They're putting a version 0.2 chip in her head, and she's a mute Terminator, essentially assassin for hire, leased out by the American government. And her role is, unfortunately, a supporting role this time around compared to Robert Shaw's character, which is the CIA Hong Kong kind of agent, which is basically trying to stop and foil the assassination attempt on the Russian president's life. There's a lot going on in terms of on paper, but unfortunately the context, the kind of the meat on the bone is very much lacking. One thing I would say straight away about this film is it's got a good concept. I like the idea of, her character being semi-supportive. I don't mind that actually, because it makes sense with what they've done to her, from the events of the first movie, making her into a bit of a mute Terminator, kind of giving her a certain type of skill set with seeing radiation, and, she's basically emotionless for a good portion. There is an opportunity to do something quite interesting there, which is the idea of her breaking the conditions of her programming. She's been brainwashed heavily, kind of messed around with her head, and chips being planted, and they show this with her basically screaming and showing clips from the first movie as well, to kind of demonstrate that, with her being not in control of her body and her actions essentially. But while some fragments do kind of slip out from time to time, with her picking up a cat and her laughing, or her saying something that she probably shouldn't be really saying, but she is heavily conditioned and programmed, especially with a device that's been given to Robert Shaw's character, which kind of switches her off essentially. And she's been leased out to him. A assassination attempt is going to happen on the Russian president. Who cares? That aspect of the film, the narrative and the storyline, I thought was quite weak ultimately, even though it's going for much more of a bigger international feel. And I do appreciate that, because it does definitely have some unique kind of scenarios and setups within kind of the Canadian kind of like, ski tops with the mountains, and it has some kind of cool locations, and has a bit of nice kind of production value from going from these actual like factory sets. And, you can definitely tell that they've got some good connections, and definitely to make this film feel more expensive than it is. And granted, it definitely does have some good B-movie classic kind of shenanigans in the film, which it has 3 really key kind of set pieces, which I thought were really good in the film. One being the ski sequence within the opening of the film, I thought was quite good. Definitely feels very different, feels very bigger kind of thing, with these kind of assassins coming in, taking out this kind of Russian defector. You've got the second kind of late second act going into the third act, kind of factory sequence where Black Cat's character is taking on a bunch of goons, revolving kind of poles and metals, electric, that's pretty fun. That's pretty fast paced and pretty awesome. And then of course you got the third act finale involving the kind of the airport sequence where she's kind of taking out the plane, and you've got our main bad guy, essentially this Russian bad guy, which also is mute, doesn't really say anything, which has these kind of cool grappling hooks, and that's a pretty cool little fight that happens in the third act. So some of the key action moments and some of the more stupider ones with her killing a granny and a mole with blood being splattered onto a clown is pretty funny, but kind of ultimately slows down the film a little bit. And unfortunately, what makes this film quite disappointing, a bit lackluster, and kind of a massive waste of opportunity. The film could have had the idea of her regaining her memories, regaining her kind of sense of self and purpose and her personality again, remembering the events of the first film, who she is, and changing as a character, obviously going along with her character growth, and her choosing to basically help stop this kind of Russian kind of assassination attempt with the bad guys being traditional bad guys. And you could have had a much more kind of dynamic, kind of interesting kind of team up, different circumstances within Robert Show's kind of character, which compared to what it was within the most of the film, which of her being quite mute and quite lifeless, and very much him just spouting off dialogue and exposition, and there isn't much really going on there, and it kind of feels a bit sluggish because there isn't much kind of talking points, there isn't really much interaction between them two, apart from loads and loads of scenes of just boardroom meetings and Russians talking and Americans talking, and which is really funny when you think about it, because most of the first film was a lot of talking. It actually had more of a compelling drama narrative going on, but the differences here is I'm actually much more engaging and much more invested in what's happening, because you've got Sam Yep's character, you've got the kind of shadowy organization, you've got her perspective, her going through this training process, you've got the love aspect to it, you've got her sense of duty, you've got the endangerment and high stakes. And unfortunately, this film doesn't have much of that. You're not caring about her character compared to what it was in the first film. And the weird thing about it is that they actually do address this idea of her breaking out of her conditioning and her getting injured within her head, and she's got this technology within her brain, and they kind of backtrack it. She regains a little bit who she is. She doesn't remember her birthday. There's a nice little encounter within the kind of apartment, and then she's immediately taken back horror style, put back into the program, and that's about it. There's no opportunity for her to essentially break from that or escape, and lead into a very interesting third entry where potentially she can go back to a love interest, maybe get Sam Yep to come back. You could have done a really kick-ass, awesome third entry in this franchise and kind of top it off, but they decide to kind of just tease it and then resort back to basically nothing essentially. And ultimately for me, that's what lets the film down quite a lot, is that while I do appreciate the gimmicky B-movie action set moments and set pieces, they are really fun. They're definitely on location for a lot of it. They definitely have some good production value, as mentioned, and the bad guys are just traditional over-the-top kind of bad guys, wire works, all sorts going on, and some gimmicky kind of weapons. And there is some good effort there to do even though it is a straight to DVD kind of, low budget but slightly higher budget kind of sequel, it kind of misses its mark a little bit to do something quite special. And you could have done the same kind of idea, but just tweak it in a way to make it more compelling for a returning kind of viewer. And, this is meant to be a potential franchise. There could have been a really strong third entry in this to kind of really cap it off and to really kind of bring in the best of both the kind of the B-movie action and the drama and the compelling kind of storyline. You could have done a Bourne Identity kind of idea. So what are your thoughts and opinions on Black Cat 2, guys? Please comment down below. I'd love to know your thoughts and opinions. In the meantime, guys, Amphlett Reviews, signing out.